A tourist yanked the hat off a guardsman, confident that he could get away with anything. But a single step forward from the guardsman and the words of a little girl turned everything upside down. What happened next became a lesson for everyone. A sunny morning bathed Buckingham Palace in golden hues. Crowds of tourists swarmed the square in front of its gates, creating the usual cacophony of camera clicks, voices in various languages, and endless flashes. Amid this chaos stood Guardsman Thomas Stone, unmoving. His tall bearskin hat and impeccably pressed red tunic made him look like an emblem straight out of a history textbook. But for Thomas, it was just another day on duty. The crowd, seemingly enchanted, photographed him from every angle. Some tried to make him smile, shouting, "Hey mate, take a selfie with me!" Others posed beside him, pulling goofy faces. Yet Thomas remained motionless. His expression reflected absolute focus, as if he neither saw nor heard the commotion around him. Amid the sea of tourists, a group of young men stood out. Their leader, a tall and cocky guy named Chris, sported a bright t-shirt with "I was here" printed across it. Loud and boisterous, he was clearly aiming to draw attention. His goal was simple: to stand out from the crowd, to put on a show. "Look at that guy. He's like he's stuck in Madame Tussauds," Chris jeered, pointing at Thomas. "Let's see if he's even alive." The crowd chuckled, and Chris's friends clapped, encouraging him. Emboldened by the reaction, Chris stepped up to the line that no one was supposed to cross. "Well, folks," he called out to his friends, "think I can grab that funny hat?" "Go for it, Chris. Show us what you've got," someone shouted from the crowd. The laughter grew louder. Chris, sensing his moment, reached for the iconic hat. His face lit up with excitement, as if he were about to achieve something monumental. In an instant, the hat was in Chris's hands. He held it aloft like a trophy and shouted gleefully, "Look, everyone! I've got it! The royal hat!" The crowd gasped. Some laughed nervously, but others began murmuring among themselves. Another moment passed, and Chris plopped the hat on his head, making a ridiculous face. His friends cheered loudly, spurred on by the spectacle. Chris turned to one of them and joked, "How do I look? Ready to be king?" But this time, the laughter was subdued. The crowd's mood shifted. People whispered to each other, with a growing number expressing disapproval. "That's too much." "Isn't that disrespectful? It's the Queen's Guard." "What a disgrace." Chris, initially oblivious, continued to pose, but his audience's focus began to shift. Then, something unexpected happened. A small girl, no older than 6, stepped out of the crowd. She clutched a balloon in her hand, and her wide eyes were filled with innocent reproach. "That's not your hat," she said, staring straight at Chris. "Give it back, mister." Her quiet voice cut through the noise. The crowd froze. Even Chris hesitated for a moment, taken aback. But he quickly recovered and chuckled nervously. "Hey, relax, kid. It's just a joke." But the little girl didn't back down. She frowned, and tears welled up in her eyes. "My mom says you're not supposed to take things that aren't yours." The crowd stirred. People began shouting, "Give it back! This is shameful." Chris looked around at his friends, but the ones who had been laughing moments earlier were now silent, uneasy. For the first time, Thomas Stone broke protocol. He took a deliberate step forward. The motion was sharp, precise, and commanding, like a hammer striking an anvil. The crowd immediately fell silent, all eyes fixed on him. Thomas approached the little girl, gently took her hand, and bent slightly to reassure her. Then he turned to Chris, his icy gaze piercing. The tension was palpable, with only the faint sound of rustling leaves breaking the silence. Without a word, Thomas snatched the hat from Chris's hands. The movement was swift and confident, the act of someone who knew his authority. He held the hat aloft, gave it a subtle shake as if to brush off invisible dirt, and placed it back on his head with careful precision. "Step back behind the white line," he said in a low, commanding voice. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Chris, now pale, stepped backward awkwardly. The crowd, which had been filming him moments before, erupted into applause for the guardsman. "Well done! someone shouted. "Way to go! Show them how it's done!" The little girl smiled and softly said to Thomas, "Thank you." Thomas gave her a slight nod before resuming his post, but the moment was etched in the memory of everyone present. For Chris, the ordeal was far from over. Videos of his antics spread like wildfire across social media. Outrage poured in from every corner of the internet. What a disgrace! A grown man acting like a child. That little girl had more dignity than he did. If you can't respect traditions, don't bother visiting. Chris woke up the next day infamous, not in the way he had hoped. His friends sent him links to headlines like, "Tourist embarrasses himself at Buckingham Palace." The next morning, he returned to Buckingham Palace looking very different. No friends, no jokes. He wore a simple shirt and carried a large bouquet of flowers. People in the crowd recognized him. Some chuckled, others filmed, but Chris kept walking, ignoring the attention. Reaching the white line, he stopped. Thomas stood there, as still and imposing as ever. Chris carefully set the flowers down and looked up, speaking loudly enough for all to hear. "I'm sorry for yesterday. What I did was stupid and disrespectful. I respect your service." The crowd watched in silence. Thomas, ever the professional, didn't respond. But those watching could have sworn they saw his bearskin hat shift slightly, almost like a nod of acknowledgement. The little girl, standing with her parents in the crowd, beamed when she heard Chris's apology. "Good job, mister! Now it's right!" she called out. The crowd burst into applause. "That's better!" someone shouted. Chris, blushing slightly, smiled, knowing he'd made amends. Thomas, ignoring the noise, stood firm, a majestic symbol of tradition and honor. This moment would stay with Chris forever. For the crowd, it was a reminder that respect for tradition isn't just a rule, it's a sign of culture and maturity.